Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube. Now, coming up today, this is our end of the week, nutrition IQ raising, health trailblazing, gonna get your mouth craving food that is simply amazing edition of the Doctor's Mailbag, where you get the opportunity to ask two doctors who are so well known and so well educated in this realm. It's going to blow your mind. We're going to be asking questions with Dr. Jim Loomis. He's here with us today. Dr. Loomis, appreciate you being here. And Dr. Neal Barnard will be joining us as well today. So if you have a question for either one of the doctors, go ahead and post that in the comments section right now, or you can tweet that to us using the hashtag ExamRoomLive. Already such great questions coming in, questions about vegan butter versus regular butter. We've got questions about vitamin B12 and low iron levels on a plant-based diet, and that, my friend, is just the tip of the iceberg. So much more to come, so get your questions in right now. But before we go any further, let's get a check on what is happening. Here are your health headlines for Friday, November 20th, 2020. And we begin with the coronavirus, where unwanted milestones just keep coming. Thursday, another record-breaking number of new infections as 187,000 Americans test positive for the virus, with cases now rising in every state. Thursday, also one of the deadliest on record since May, more than 2,000 people losing their lives 1 week before Thanksgiving. In the last 24 hours, the CDC also urging Americans not to travel for Thanksgiving this year. Auto Club AAA now forecasting at least a 10% decline in travel compared to last Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, there is positive news, however, as drug maker Pfizer says it will be seeking emergency authorization with the FDA today for its coronavirus vaccine. This on the heels of the announcement that the vaccine is 95% effective. The first 25 million doses could be ready as soon as the middle of next month. Experts believe production will ramp up to cover an additional 25 to 30 million people per month beginning early next year. The first doses are expected to be distributed to the most vulnerable populations, including those in nursing homes and healthcare workers on the front line. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that the U.S. could return to some form of normalcy by the middle of next year if the country remains diligent about mask wearing, social distancing, in addition to widespread vaccine rollout. And finally, in other news, check this out. Beyond Meat says it is going to release 2 new versions of its popular plant-based burger. And for the health conscious, it's music to their ears. Both burgers will be lower in saturated fat, one by 35%, the other by an impressive 55% when compared to traditional beef. The company says both will also have fewer calories and should hit store shelves sometime early next year. So stay on the lookout for that. Not too bad. All right. As promised, this is Q&A Day, Doctor's Mailbag Extravaganza here on the Exam Room Live. Your opportunity to ask questions of the doctors. And if you want to get yours in, go ahead and post it in the comments now or the chat box. As always, you can also tweet that to us using the hashtag Exam Room Live. Just send that over to @PCRM or @Chuck Carroll, WLC. We'll open up that Doctor's Mailbag and get you going. And let's go ahead and get going right now. Dr. Barnard, the first question is going to you, my friend. It comes to us from Jesse. Jesse is wondering about the plant-based butter. Writes, if you eat earth-balanced vegan butter, per volume, the same amount of saturated fat compared to dairy butter. So what is the health comparison there?
Okay, great question, because so many people are getting away from butter. Understandably, butter does raise cholesterol levels and it expands your waistline and does all the things that a pure fat is likely to do. So if you go to a plant-based butter substitute, generally they are better than butter. The saturated fat content is usually lower and there's no cholesterol in them because they're from plants. That's good. However, a couple of things. Read the label. And there are 2 things to look for on the label. One is the saturated fat content. If it's down to maybe, if it's very, very low, then you're okay. But if it's at all a significant part of the total fat content, I would get away from it. If it's a gram or less, something like that, okay, fair enough. But if it's 3-4 grams, that will affect your cholesterol level. And saturated fat is also linked to Alzheimer's disease. So that's why we want to avoid butter. You don't want your vegan one to be almost as bad. The other thing is look at what it's made from. If it's made from coconut oil, that's a problem because that's a huge source of saturated fat. If it's made from palm oil, Same story. Palm oil is high in saturated fat. Not quite as bad as coconut, but it's there. So where does earth balance come in? You'll see the word palm oil on there. You'll see a fair amount of saturated fat. So I would say, rather than buttering your bread, get a better bread.
Good answer. Get a better bread, everybody. Dr. Loomis, first question for you today comes from Melissa. She says, I do not eat animal products, so why is my cholesterol still high? I also try to limit as much oil as possible in my diet. We get this question a lot.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. And we see this quite often at the Barnard Medical Center. So a couple things. There's, if you look at plant-based diets, there's kind of a spectrum of potato chips and kind of less healthy plant-based options versus a true whole food plant-based diet with really no added fat, no processed foods. And so first of all, you just want to be sure that you're maximizing the nutritional value of the meals you ate. And what you're really looking for is to be sure that your fiber intake is north of 50 grams, even closer to 75 would be great. And that the percent of your total calories from fat is about 10 to 15%. That's kind of hard to do if you're eating a lot of nuts and nut butters and seeds. Sometimes I'll actually have patients track that using an app like Chronometer. So that's number one. Number two, as we've talked about on this show in the past, there is some evidence that unfiltered coffee may raise LDL. And that's something that I don't know that we address sometimes, we overlook. There's a compound in coffee called cathistol, which raises LDL cholesterol. It interferes with cholesterol metabolism, but it's filtered out by paper filters. So if you're using like a Keurig or like a coffee maker that has like one of those little gold filters where there's no paper or French press, you might try switching over to filtered coffee for a bit and see if that makes a difference. There is an association with high cholesterol and thyroid disease. So if you haven't had your thyroid function checked in a while, be sure that's taken care of. And there are, there is a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, which is an inherited condition. People who have both genes for that, unfortunately, have extremely high cholesterol levels and have heart attacks in their youth. But people can have inherit one of the genes or have variable penetration of the genes, so that you don't really you don't have cholesterol numbers in the 600-700 range, but they do remain elevated despite leading kind of a perfect lifestyle. Exercise, by the way, being sure you're getting at least 30 to 60 minutes most days, something to get your heart rate up, has also been shown to lower cholesterol. So in summary, it's really about maximizing your diet through fiber and fat.
Oh dear. I believe that we may have lost Dr. Loomis there. Yeah, we'll come back to Dr. Loomis in just a minute. That was a pretty impressive coffee breakdown there. So we'll come back to him in just a moment. So let's head over to Dr. Barnard now. Dr. Barnard, we're going to jump across the pond. We've got a question here from Angelina. She's watching us in London today. She wants to know, do you have any tips for helping with iron deficiency? She says that she's having trouble eating leafy greens because they don't necessarily agree with her tummy. So how can she get that iron level up?
Well, first of all, thanks to our friends from the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Thanks for joining us. First of all, I would ask why the green vegetables aren't agreeing with you too much. If they give you a little bit of, shall I say, indigestion or gassiness, you might cook them a little bit more. That will not destroy their iron at all. The iron is going to be there no matter how long you cook them. So you might try, even though all your friends say, oh, you want them as raw as possible or whatever, if you're not digesting them well, cook them more. That's true for broccoli, kale, and collards, and really all the cruciferous vegetables as well. So that should help. There are other iron sources. Beans also have iron as well. But let's go back to why are you low in iron? If you are exercising a lot, you can lose a little bit more iron. Also, in the event that if your diet is not quite plant-based and you're eating a lot of oil, and if you're having menstrual cycles that are a little bit heavier and you're losing too much iron with blood flow, what you'll find is that on a healthy, really low-fat vegan diet, that will tend to settle out a little bit more. And of course, your doctor looking at a low iron level. If you're actually anemic, your doctor is going to want to check to make sure that there isn't blood loss from some other reason. But see if there isn't a way to bring the greens back into your diet. It's a good way to do it.
All right. I believe we have Dr. Loomis back. And so let's go to him for this next question. Comes to us from Jana at 11:55 this morning. Wants to know, is it safe to take vitamin D together with calcium? She said that she hears that can dispense into the wrong places, such as arteries and kidneys instead of bones. So what do we know about that correlation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, and by the way, just to go back to the iron question, one other important thing is to be sure you co-ingest vitamin C, a source of vitamin C, when you take plant-based iron, because it's non-heme iron and you need vitamin C to increase the absorption. So that's an important another thing. Put some lemon juice on your greens. But a great question about vitamin D and calcium. There is in fact some evidence that, particularly in women who take calcium supplements, and I'm not talking about calcium in food, but calcium supplements, may in fact have an increased risk of coronary artery calcification. And so what happens is that when we start to develop plaques in our coronary arteries, over time, those plaques become calcified. It's like a little scar that builds up in the artery. And that calcium supplementation may in fact increase the risk for that. The good news is you don't need to take calcium supplements to get plenty of calcium in your diet. In fact, plants have lots of calcium. Some of them are excellent. So in the vitamin D, one of vitamin D's job is to help us absorb the calcium from the food that we eat. So, things like tofu has a tremendous amount of calcium, collard greens, green leafy vegetables. So you don't need to, there is an association between calcium supplements and calcification in the blood vessels. That's the bad news. The good news is you don't need to take those supplements to ensure you're getting an adequate amount of calcium in your diet.
All right, Dr. Barnard, bouncing over to you for this next one, kind of following up on what it was Dr. Loomis was just talking about. It's a question from Dodger. Wants to know, how much B12 and vitamin D should I be taking?
Okay, the amount of vitamin B12 that you need, and this is really not optional. You do need to have it if you're on a plant-based diet. And frankly, it's a good idea for anybody because lots of people are low in B12. The amount that your body actually needs for an adult is 2.4 micrograms per day. So if you go to the drugstore, you'll discover that all the pills are more. They're 200 micrograms or 500 or 1,000. And the reason for that is that they want to make sure that there's some extra, but sometimes I got to tell you, they really overdo it in amounts that you don't actually need. So get the smallest one that they sell, or online you'll see them maybe down to about 100 micrograms a day. Perfectly fine. Take that every day. If you get a big one, like 1,000 micrograms, you take that every other day. For vitamin D, if you're getting lots of sunlight because you are living in a tropical area, you don't need to take vitamin D probably, and you can get tested. But if you're low or unsure, most doctors would say take about 2,000 international units per day. That's higher than the recommended daily allowance, but not getting you into the danger zone. If you're going above that, there can be adverse effects.
And following up on that, Christian has a question here about B12 as well. I'm not sure if we have data on this, but wants to know, when do we start giving children vitamin B12?
Conception. It's part of the prenatal vitamins, and you should be taking it when you're pregnant, and you should be also taking it if you are breastfeeding, which I hope you are. Let me make a quick pitch about that. Breastfeeding sometimes feels uncomfortable and awkward or even downright painful. And back in the old days, we were surrounded by older sisters, mothers, grandparents who were experienced with it. And nowadays, sometimes people are kind of off on their own. It's really good to get some support so that you are breastfeeding. And when you are, yes, you want to make sure that you are supplementing your own diet with vitamin B12 that will go through to the baby.
Dr. Loomis, over to you now. Pat is looking to get a jump start on her New Year's resolutions. She writes that I started a vegan diet 3 months ago, but have not lost any weight yet. Can you provide any help?
So a couple things. As I mentioned earlier, a vegan diet can range the spectrum from maybe not so healthy foods, high in fat, to foods that are very healthy. So the first thing is again, just to maximize the nutritional value of the food that you're eating. When we have extra money, we want to invest it in our financial future, and we're looking for a positive return on investment, positive ROI. Well, that's how we should think about our food, because every calorie you put in your mouth is either an investment in your health future or it's not. And if you have 100 calories to spend right this minute, and you could spend it however you wanted, what does the nutritional value of various foods look like? Olive oil, for example. You heard olive oil is healthy. Well, 100 calories of olive oil, and this is true for any oil, is only about a tablespoon. That's not going to take up much space in your stomach. And what do you get back from that nutritionally? It's just fat. There's no fiber that's going to help you feel full and lower your cholesterol and lower your blood sugar and lower your blood pressure. There's no protein. There's no cancer-fighting phytonutrients, antioxidants. Really, probably the worst return on your investment overall of any food, frankly. What about animal-based foods like chicken breast or egg? Again, it's an ounce. You don't get anything but fat and protein. There's no fiber. Broccoli. 100 calories of broccoli is about 12 ounces, right? You're going to feel full. It's going to give you 7-8 grams of fiber. There's almost as much protein as in an egg. You've got cancer-fighting phytonutrients, a much better return on your investment. So be sure that you're really focusing on the nutrient density of your food. And again, you can use the same parameters. If you're not sure, if you want to spot check, you can use an app like Chronometer or MyFitnessPal. Keep a food diary for a day or two, and really aim again for that 50 grams of fiber plus less than 15% of your calories is 15% of your calories is fat. Exercise also very important. Again, 30 minutes to an hour most days, something to get our heart rate up. A couple days a week, we need to replicate picking stuff up, moving out of the way, some type of light resistance training. And again, if you haven't seen your primary care doctor in a while, be sure that you've gone and you've had some blood work done in a physical. Be sure your low thyroid, for example, can impair weight loss, and just be sure there's nothing metabolically going on that could lead to weight gain or difficulty losing weight.
Dr. Barnard, over to you. A mindful question about gluten here. Somebody wants to know, does gluten negatively impact the brain?
Let me give a definite maybe on that. For most people, no. You're going to have spaghetti and bread and whatever, no problem at all. But for some people, they do react to it. And for people who are wondering, what is gluten anyway? Gluten it's a protein, and it's in wheat, and it's in everything that wheat turns into, like bread and pasta and so forth. It's all also in barley, and it's in rye and a very few other grains. So about 1% or a little bit less than 1% of people have a condition called celiac disease, where they're reacting to gluten and it is tearing up their intestinal tract and they cannot have gluten. But a larger number of people, maybe 1 in 10, something like that, you can eat gluten, but you feel better if you don't. And when I say feel better, digestively, but also mentally. You'll feel more fuzzy when you have gluten and less fuzzy if you don't. The other 90% of people, you stop eating spaghetti for a while, you're kicking yourself because it's annoying to shop on a gluten-free diet, and you are getting no benefit at all by avoiding gluten. For you, it's perfectly fine. So what do you do? If you got celiac disease, no brainer, got to avoid it. If you just feel better without gluten, off you go. You can go ahead and avoid it.
All right, let's stick with you, sir. And the question comes to us from Laura. She wants to know, do you think oil can cause acne?
That's also in my maybe column. There are a lot of people who do discover that when they do two things, they get the animal products off their plate, but they're also scrupulously avoiding oils. Their acne clears up. And what can you do? Give it a try.
All right. Dr. Loomis, let's head over to you. You seem to be pretty clued in on gut bacteria. You're a good expert on that. This is a question from Michelle. She writes, how do you get enough variety of fruits and vegetables in the winter months in the northern states? Is eating less variety in the winter and more in the summer okay for your gut bacteria?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we're getting into the winter months, fortunately, with the food system that we have, you can almost always find fresh fruits and vegetables at the store. Now, some of it's imported, and you do have to be a little bit careful with pesticides, herbicides, things like that. Frozen fruits and vegetables are another option. Freezing fruits and vegetables really doesn't change the nutritional value very much. And so that's another great option, especially if you're making things like fruits and soups and stews or stir fries. Using frozen vegetables or smoothies, certainly an option in the wintertime. Oftentimes, I'll buy big bags of organic blueberries at Costco, and I'll just throw them in the microwave and dump them on top of my oatmeal, just like I would with fresh oatmeal, with fresh blueberries when they're in season in the summer months. So again, if you're concerned about the pesticides and herbicides in imported fruits and vegetables, the Environmental Working Group, EWG, goes out and they purchase both locally grown and international and imported fruits and vegetables from South America and Mexico. They actually test them every year for contaminants, pesticides, and herbicides. And they publish, it's called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen every year. And so you can kind of go there and get a feel for which foods you need to kind of be a little bit careful about, or you need to clearly buy organic, and which you don't.
All right, we spoke earlier about high cholesterol. Let's look at high blood pressure now, Dr. Loomis. A question from Sharon. She writes, my blood pressure is 155/90, even though I've been eating vegan for 8 years. Do you have any suggestions? I also don't use a lot of oil.
Yeah, so another common problem we see, there are, when we talk about blood pressure, high blood pressure, there's kind of what's called primary hypertension, and that's what the normal kind of hypertension makes up about 98% plus of the high blood pressure we see in the office, and that's kind of for no good reason. There are lots of lifestyle influences, though, and very important. So weight loss, for example, you see about 1 point drop in your blood pressure for every kilo that you lose. So kilo is 2 pounds, so 10 pounds, 5 points. So if you need to lose weight, that's one place to start. We know that in general, a high fiber, low fat, plant strong diet, what's called the DASH diet, that's probably your biggest bang for the buck. And that's about 10 points. And you're probably, it sounds like you're doing most of that already. But again, just spot check and be sure, that fiber intake's high, fat intake's low.
All right.
Limiting your sodium intake, less than 1,500 milligrams a day, increasing your potassium intake, exercise, weights. Also limiting alcohol. For women, you should really drink no more than 1 drink a day. That can raise blood pressure. Now, there are some other things to be concerned about. There are medications over the counter, decongestants, anti-inflammatories, both can raise blood pressure. Another condition that's overlooked often that can raise blood pressure is sleep apnea, and that's a condition where you stop breathing at night, and getting tested for sleep apnea if your blood pressure seems out of whack compared to your lifestyle is something you ought to talk to your doctor about. Some symptoms of that are daytime fatigue and snoring.
All right, Dr. Barnard, over to you. Here's a question from Kathy, came in at 12:23 today. Maybe a question, maybe a little bit about carbs. How good, how bad are they? She wants to know how much pasta is recommended that we eat every single week. Is there a limit on pasta?
No, I would say not. The limit is what you put on your pasta. If you're topping it with Alfredo sauce, meat sauce, other high fat, high cholesterol things, that's really a problem. Now, some people say, what are you talking about? Pasta is all carbs. Well, researchers have actually fed various kinds of carbohydrates to research volunteers, and they've tested their effects on blood sugar. And if I give you, say, some slices of wheat bread, your blood sugar is going to rise fairly quickly. If I take that same flour and I make it into pasta and I feed you the same amount of carbohydrate, but now it's as pasta, you discover your blood sugar doesn't rise anywhere near as fast. Why is that? Because pasta is dense. It's compacted, unlike the bread, which has yeast added to it that makes it fluffy. And so your digestive enzymes and stomach acid can break that bread apart really fast. But the pasta, no matter how much you chew it, it digests really slowly, and it liberates its sugars pretty gently. So I wouldn't worry too much about pasta.
All right, Dr. Barnard, let's go to your latest book, Your Body in Balance, where you tackled PCOS really in depth, did a masterful job there. We have a question from Masha. She wants to know, do you have any suggestions for young women who have PCOS?
Oh, well, thank you for that question. And there are so many people who have this, and they go to the doctor and they come back even more confused than ever. First of all, just really, really quickly, and you will read all the details in Your Body in Balance, but just the Cliff Notes version. Polycystic ovary syndrome is actually probably more genetically based. Your body is making just a little bit more testosterone than it otherwise would. And that's why you notice the occasional darkly colored hair and other maybe a little bit of thinning of your hair and that kind of thing. It turns out that changing your diet to a plant-based diet helps enormously. Why would that be? Because many people with PCOS, they're gaining weight. Their hormones are not in such a good balance, and a plant-based diet that's high in fiber and low in fat tends to bring the hormones back into better balance. For extra credit, another part of PCOS is insulin resistance. Doctors often treat it with metformin, the same drug used to treat type 2 diabetes. Well, what's a great way to deal with insulin resistance? Plant-based diet. So you'll want to jump into the very same kinds of diets that we use for diabetes, but in this case, we're using it for your PCOS. You'll also see in your Body in Balance, you'll see the story of Allison, who was a dietitian in Wisconsin, who ended up changing her own diet for PCOS. She was not ovulating normally. She and her husband were having a lot of trouble getting pregnant. She finally switched her own diet to a completely healthy plant-based diet and got pregnant very quickly. And she shared her inspiring story. I want to thank Allison, but let me also encourage you to have a look at that and see if it doesn't inspire you to make some helpful changes in your own life.
She's such an inspirational woman. We've had her on the podcast here twice now, and each time just it moves you. It's impossible to hear her story and not get choked up a little bit.
Exactly.
Let's go over now to Dr. Loomis. Dr. Loomis, here's a question. We have time for just two more here. You're a foodie. I know that you spend quite a bit of time in the kitchen. We have a question from Meg at 12:20 today. She wants to know, what is your take on seitan and TVP?
So for those of you who don't know, textured vegetable protein is highly processed soy, and honestly, not a big fan. Again, when we highly process the soy product, unlike whole plant-based sources of soy like edamame and tempeh and even tofu to some degree, which may actually lower your risk for breast cancer, for example. There's some evidence that high levels of TVP may have the opposite effect, and it has to do with activating one of the estrogen receptors in breast tissue. So not a huge fan of that. Seitan I do use on occasion. Now seitan is somewhat processed. What it is, it's flour. It's wheat flour which has had the gluten removed, and it's basically just pure gluten. Seitan is vital wheat gluten is the other name for it. I do use that sparingly. A lot of people use it to make meat-like meals, and it does cook up. You can flavor it and make what tastes like corned beef or chicken wings or things like that. I do use seitan on occasion. It's not nearly as highly processed as as something like TVP, I don't cook with it every day by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like seitan, and I like playing around with the different flavors, and you can cook it different ways. Now, obviously, if you have issues digesting gluten, you need to be careful because it is pure gluten, basically. But I do use that. I'm not a fan of TVP. Seitan in moderation.
All right. And let me just say here, as we get ready to close up the doctor's mailbag here, I look forward to the day that you take the time to assemble all of your recipes, put them on paper, and release a cookbook. It needs to happen because you have some serious food knowledge, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. You're not the first person to suggest that. Maybe in my free time, right?
yeah, and therein lies the problem.
Right.
Okay. Exactly. All right, final question. We're going to head over to Dr. Barnard to take us home today. It's a good one from Melissa at 12:23. She wants to know, are there any plant-based foods that need to be avoided to control Crohn's disease?
Great question. Many people who have Crohn's disease get a lot better when they go plant-based. And so the question, by that I mean you're throwing out the dairy. That's kind of job one. A lot of people improve dramatically there. Getting away from the other animal products is a good idea too. So the question is there more you can do? Dr. Alan Desmond did a wonderful presentation for us this past year at our International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine. If you get a chance, you can see that at our Nutrition CME, as in continuing medical education, nutritioncme.org website. You will enjoy it. You'll learn a lot. But the short answer is yes. I think there are people who, if they have Crohn's disease, they'll find that they often do better to explore if there are certain foods that seem to be bigger triggers for them. And that's not true just for Crohn's, it's for a number of other conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and others. So what we do, one way of approaching this in a logical way, is you get away from animal products completely. If that cures your problem or improves it just dramatically, fine, you're done. But if you still have some symptoms, you might want to do an elimination diet. And that means for a little while, maybe a week or 10 days, something like that, eat only the foods that we know really don't cause problems for anybody. And that's rice, really cooked vegetables, fruits that are also cooked like applesauce. They're very gentle on your body. And then you'll find that your symptoms, in many cases, really settle down. Then bring back the foods that you excluded one at a time and add one every 2 days. So something like apples or bananas, you took them out, now you're bringing them back. Have a lot of them, a lot of apples for 2 days, 3 or 4 a day. If it doesn't cause any symptoms, keep them. Same with then bananas. And when you bring in things like wheat or citrus or tomatoes, you might find that you're hitting foods that for some people they react to. If you do, set them aside again and bring them back later. So you're bringing in one food a day to see how it works. I wrote about this in my book, The Cheese Trap. Look in the appendix. You'll see the elimination diet is described in detail.
All right. If we did not get to your question today, have no fear. We will save it and do our best to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. And if you would like to help prevent Dr. Loomis from finding the time to make that cookbook, go ahead and schedule an appointment to see him over at the Barnard Medical Center. You can do that by logging on to barnardmedical.org or by calling 202-527-7500. Plenty of other plant-based dietitians and doctors would also love to work with you there. Dr. Vanita Rahman, Dr. Jasmine Sardana, so many wonderful people over at the Barnard Medical Center that would love to get you going on your healthier journey. So barnardmedical.org or 202-527-7500 for a full list of states where services are available. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both very much for your time today. Appreciate you bringing us the knowledge.
Sure. Thank you, Chuck. And thank you,
Chuck.
Have a wonderful weekend. All right. Now, coming up on Monday's show, it's a big show. We're going to be mastering diabetes with Dr. Cyrus Kambata and Robbie Barbero from Mastering Diabetes. They're going to be here along with Meg Donahue from Mama Says. She was on the show a few weeks ago. Come to find out, they have teamed up to put together a whole food, plant-based meal delivery packet specifically for people who have diabetes to help regulate that blood sugar, get you going in that right direction. We're going to talk all about that, probably give you some healthy tips for Thanksgiving as well. So that will be on Monday's show. That's right back here on Facebook and YouTube. That will be at noon Eastern. But for today's show, that, my friend, is all the time that we have. I want to say thank you again to Drs. Barnard and Loomis for raising our nutrition IQs, and also to the crew behind the scenes that makes the magic happen. Thank you, guys. And to you who's watching, my exam roomie, appreciate you being here as well. On behalf of everyone at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Have a tremendous weekend. We'll talk to you again Monday. But until then, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.